Hey everyone, welcome to episode 104 of The Green Life. Today I'm speaking with a very special guest, Dr. Pam Popper. Dr. Popper is a naturopath, internationally recognized expert on nutrition, medicine and health, and is the executive director of Wellness for Health, as well as serving as a lecturer on Dr. Colin Campbell's plant-based certification course at eCornell. I'm really excited to have Dr. Popper on. We're going to talk about health being our biggest weapon. So she has a million stories and she has a fantastic journey where she went from not feeling great to thriving. She is amazing. Now, before we get into this episode, I want to just give a big shout out to Namawell for the J2 juicer. You guys know I love my juicer, and if you want to go into a blender as well, now they have the C2, which gives you the juicer and the blender. And hey, as we talk about health is our biggest weapon, well, start eating plants because they are amazing for us. Now, I also want to say I'm an affiliate of Dr. Morse's Beautiful Herbs. And if you want to get better, if you are wanting to cleanse, please do check them out. They are fantastic. This is only for the US. I have a 5% discount in the show notes as well. It's only valid for your first purchase. In terms of more nutrients in our diet, good plant-based protein, I am an affiliate of Newzest. I absolutely love them. No artificial sweeteners, nothing that is bad for us. It's really designed for us to thrive. And if you look up the story of this brand, you'll see why I love them so much. And again, the show notes will have the links, as well as other brands that I endorse and love, as well as my links. If you want to work with me, come and visit at my retreat and really just create the community that we want to create here. Okay guys, without further ado, let's jump into this fascinating episode with Dr. Pam Popper. Hello, Dr. Popper. Thank you so much for joining me on The Green Life today. How are you?
I'm fine, and thank you so much for having me. I enjoy these kinds of discussions a lot.
My pleasure. I have been following you since just around 2020 when everything kick-started, and speaking about real health and really truly diving into what it is to have that power and sovereignty, which was taken away worldwide for a little while.
Exactly.
And it's been really nice to follow your journey and see what a beautiful spokesperson for real health you are. So today on the podcast, I'd love to speak about how health is really our biggest weapon. No matter what happens, that's really what gives us freedom. So, but before we get into that, if people are not familiar with you, your story, how you became a naturopathic doctor, your practice, can you just give me a little bit of background?
Okay, great. So here's the 90-second summary. I really had no interest in health in early adulthood, and I used to be obese. So people have only seen the me who's not obese. Terrible eating habits, and just didn't pay attention to it. Wasn't on my radar screen. I had a really good job with a great company, and had fate not intervened, I'd probably still be working there. I wasn't unhappy. But I was traveling a lot, and that makes you unhealthier unless you know how to stay healthy. That was part of the problem. But I came across an article sitting in an airport one day about diet and health, and this is back in the early 90s. Today, there's an article in every publication. You can't read your morning newspaper without seeing it, right? But then it was kind of unusual. And I mentioned to a friend that I thought this was interesting, and she loaned me John McDougall's book. It was the original McDougall plan. And I read it, it made sense to me. And I said, okay, I'm just going to do this. And I melted down. I mean, literally became half of myself and ran a marathon. People were astounded. Like, what happened to you? You used to be one of us and now you're not. But I got so interested in it. And I think the thing that was most compelling for me was I thought I was really intelligent. And so and I think I am, but how I missed learning about diet and health and that sort of thing was curious to me. So I thought that, I want to teach this to other people. So I went back to school, and because of my business training, I was thinking about, when I got into this business, what is the approach that I wanted to take? Like, what's the niche in the marketplace? Because you have to create a niche or find one where you can really thrive. And it seemed to me that the biggest problem was confusion about what to do, even in the diet field, right? So that's where we started this business, with informed medical decision making as the centerpiece for it, whether it's what you're going to eat for dinner or what screening tests you're going to allow or anything else. You need to know how to look at information, sort it out, because there's a lot of garbage out there, arrive at right conclusions, and there are right and wrong answers to questions. And then that's really how you take control of your health. In other words, it doesn't really matter who your doctor is, as long as you know what the risks and benefits are of various options that might be presented to you. So I opened in 1996, and I always thought I would make it into something big, but it was kind of I didn't really have any big plan specifically, but it just grew. So we've worked with over 100,000 people in 33 countries now, using this informed process to learn how to look at information, make decisions, not because Pam says or anybody else says, but because you know what's right and you know what's wrong because you know how to look at information. So that's the short version of how we got to today.
Wow, I had no idea that you have ever been anything that the slim version of you that you are.
Oh yeah.
Honestly.
In fact, my high school reunion's coming up, and I don't want to tell you, I think it's 50 years. But an old friend of mine sent me a picture of her and I together. It doesn't even look like the same person.
Yeah.
This was maybe a couple of years after we graduated, and I didn't weigh myself back then because I didn't want to deal with it, but I was at least 50 pounds heavier than I am now. And you can't really see, but I'm tall, but I'm small boned, so 50 pounds on me is a lot of weight. I was chubby is a nice way to put it. Fat was more like it, although I always referred to myself as big boned, even though I wasn't. That sounded nicer than, gosh, what happened to me? I got fat.
I actually can relate to a couple of points there. One, the ignorance around nutrition, like what do we know? I mean, I grew up in the diet stage of life, like everybody was talking about, has slimming, cutting carbs, like, the opposite of what we actually started doing. But also like this obsession with being basically skin and bone. So you always feel inadequate, but and on top of that, what do we eat? How do we eat? Like so many things about food, the emotional component of it. So I always in my 20s, from teenagers to 20s, like I always carried extra weight on, even if I never became very big very in brackets, because a few years ago, I actually gained the biggest weight I had, which was 72 kilos, 7 to 75 kilos. That's a lot of kilos for one person that is like 168. And I don't know the measurements in the US, but kind of it was a lot, but it was really a traumatic time of my life. And I just it's fascinating because like you have to really go back to scratch and really relearn everything. And I mean, I knew exactly what I should have done, but emotions are so important. But so I can relate when you're like, your body's not really what you want it to be, but you don't want to deal with it. And then at one point you have to, and you're like, oh my gosh, how did I even get there? Right. And of course I was sick. And the point of this is also with the weight, the emotions comes the health, right? I know that there are cases where that's not the case, but in general, that is. And of course, I interviewed Dr. McDougall last year, so before his passing. And, he is very much adamant that the diet that he should follow is a very high carb diet, mostly starches, low fat. And I did that to reverse diabetes, which absolutely worked. But yeah, a lot of people are resistant to that. And there's a lot of confusion out there. On your point of information and learning, again, this is an ongoing thing because there's so much information out there and it is confusing for the general person. So in your practice, how do you start teaching people to look at evidence? Because in one of your posts, actually, you did a very good video about facts don't necessarily convince people, but obviously education does. So I'd like to know your thoughts behind how you're going to educate people, how we're going to teach them how to look at information and actually decide what's right and wrong.
Right. And you made a really good point that facts are not convincing. And one of the reasons is because everybody claims to be telling you facts. And everybody says, I'm evidence-based. Well, how can two people be evidence-based and have polar opposite points of view about things, right? So we call it the my study, your study. I read a book, you read a different book. I listened to this lecture, you heard a different one. I went to this website, you visited a different one. And so, there's a lot of money to be made in sowing this confusion because you can take advantage of people who don't know the difference and they just pick somebody whose story feels compelling. Or people do like to hear good news about their bad habits. So if you want to eat a lot of animal food and fat. You listen to somebody who's promoting a carnivore or a keto diet. So the first step that we tell people when they join Wellness Forum, regardless of their level of membership, is the only way you take control of your health is when you make the decisions. In other words, taking control of your health isn't saying, and I think this is what it has meant for a lot of people, I don't like what this doctor's telling me, so I'm going to go find a different doctor who maybe has better advice. No, it doesn't matter who the advice giver is. You have to sort it out. So some examples of things that we teach people that I think are helpful. One's obvious: conflicts of interest often dictate outcomes. But some that are not so obvious would be things like many things are shown to be statistically significant in terms of benefit, but clinically meaningless. All right, so and I'll give you a good example that everybody I think can relate to, and that's the overuse of statin drugs. So if you've not had a cardiac event or any interventional cardiology, and a doctor says your cholesterol is high, and statin drugs will lower your cholesterol, they will do that. But cholesterol is a surrogate marker, and lowering it artificially doesn't change your risk. So if you look at the data for statin drugs, they reduce your cholesterol, but they only reduce your risk of an event by 0.7%. Now, in a large cohort, that's statistically significant, but most people wouldn't take a drug with side effects for a 0.7% chance of benefiting, particularly when they look at the side effect list, right? So that would be an example. Another one is that older studies are better than newer ones. And the reason for that is that the journals are really controlled by drug companies now, and most of them are in what we call the reprint business. And what I mean by that is Pfizer or Merck or any of these companies that do business all over the world will study they'll structure a study. They pay for the studies, they own the centers where the studies are done, they conduct the studies, they gather up the data and give it to the FDA. The FDA never sees the original data here in the United States, and I don't think it's that much different in other places in the world right now. And then articles get published in journals reporting that data, right? Well, then Pfizer or Merck or whoever orders reprints of the article to give to drug reps, to give to doctors to help them learn to prescribe these particular drugs. And so to give you an idea of what that looks like, I think it was Lancet in 2019 took in $36 million in reprint business. So you're not going to make your drug company masters angry by printing negative information about particular drugs. Very hard even to get a letter to the editor in the journals these days. So, and then of course, there's more and more garbage science. And there were, I think, 10,000 articles retracted toward the end of last year. There's one journal that they think of just retracting everything in it. So all this to say, a study published in the 1960s might actually have more validity than something more recent. And in some of the papers that I write, I'll get hate mail from people saying, "Oh, you're so old-fashioned. You're not with the times. You're citing studies that were published 50 years ago." There's a good reason for that, because the stuff that was published last year is garbage, and it can't be relied on, a lot of it. So that's another one. Another one is study design. Our folks are really good at spotting that. And a good thing to look at is when nutrition information, diet information is self-reported, it's garbage. And to tell you, you're going to smile when I tell you this if you visited the United States, according to data gathered from self-reported information from US citizens, the USDA gathers this every year. It's called the NHANES data. Most people in the United States don't consume enough calories to maintain their weight. Now, all you have to do is go to a shopping mall this afternoon and just sit there and count bodies. Almost everybody's overweight or obese. So there's something wrong with self-reported data. And we're not exactly sure what goes on. Is it that people are trying to impress the researchers, or they have they don't remember accurately? But the bottom line is that the data is self-reported, then you just have to throw it out. It's not going to be reliable. So I could go on, but we have 19 different criteria that we use. And so it allows you to arrive at correct conclusions that are unassailable. And sometimes the correct conclusion is nobody knows, but everybody's acting as if they do about a particular thing. And we have to acknowledge when there's a gap in what we can know about something, but people in healthcare don't like to do that. So in the absence of knowing, we'll just make something up. And then we sound good in an interview or in an article that we write, or you can sound authoritative all the time, right? Not so good for the consumers who are following your advice, but makes for a good reputation, supposedly.
Yeah, you mentioned something really important there. I mean, there is the flip side. Like when we look at some of the nutritional article coming out that show that, for example, a plant-based diet is adequate for health, people will use that though and say, well, you say that the new studies are not accurate. But then when we look at science actually acknowledging that a plant-based diet is more than accurate for human consumption and more like for health and really promoting longevity and vitality, how do we argue with that? Because of course there will be people that will attack that side, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I think the key is, you always ask for data. And so when somebody says, this is what I do, mark it out. We're not interested in that. When somebody says, well, we did a study for 6 weeks and people on the keto diet lost 20 pounds. Well, that's assuming there's not any other way of losing weight. And there's no long-term follow-up to look at the effects of a keto diet. And by the way, that's a good example to use. We have data on the keto diet that people just don't know about. And that's the follow-up that's been done on children who went to Johns Hopkins Hospital to get over epilepsy. And the keto diet's been proven to reverse epilepsy in epileptic children. But those kids spend the rest of their life recovering from 2 years on that diet, right? So here's how people ask me all the time, well, then how does all this bad information get circulated? Well, I'll tell you how it happens. A person who does not read forwards something to 10 people who don't read. And then at the end of the month, there's 1 million people who don't read, who believe this, whatever this is. And everybody then knows that such and such a thing is good. But even around the world today, you can do population comparisons. This carnivore diet, there's a population that lives on the carnivore diet, the Maasai. They have an average lifespan of 43 years. So if that sounds good to you, well, maybe you ought to take up that diet, right? There are the Inuit population. We used to call them Eskimos, living in very harsh conditions, eat a very high-fat diet. And their average lifespan is 20 years shorter than people on the same plane that live in major cities eating terrible diets, the Western diet, right? So we have data even today, but the point is that most people, including health professionals who are promoting whatever it is they're promoting, have not really thoroughly investigated. And I've said for a long time, doctors are like herd animals. They'll latch on to things that sound interesting and then later on maybe regret it. The vitamin D hoax is the most recent example, which resulted in all branches of medicine buying into that nonsense. And they're starting to dial it back right now because the harms are starting to become evident. But that's a great example of the herd mentality of health professionals.
Tell me more about vitamin D, because this comes up all the time. That and I'll be honest, I've taken vitamin supplements because I live where there is not a lot of sun in the winter, but in the summer I'm out there. But I'd love to know about the study, about this hoax, and then what it actually means, and what do we have to do with vitamin D, because it comes up all the time.
Yeah, well, the first thing is that vitamin D is a hormone. It's been misnamed. Hormone, the medical definition of a vitamin is something that your body cannot produce, and it therefore must be consumed in food. Well, obviously, that can't qualify them, right? So it's a hormone, not a vitamin. And hormones are produced by the body and stored in the fat tissue. We're only measuring plasma levels. In order to get to the place where everybody's deficient, they had to change the reference ranges, which that's being done. The drug companies are experts at this, but the supplement companies and promoters are catching on. You change the reference ranges. And the biggest interest in vitamin D was in reference to rickets, which a lot of children got who were living in the cities instead of on farms. But back in the day, before we had vitamin D factories, they used to stick those kids on a sun deck at a hospital for a couple of weeks, and the rickets were gone. They sent them home. There wasn't any supplementation for that. So anyway, a doctor in New York invented this whole theory of vitamin D deficiency. He got the Endocrine Society to sign on. And by the way, to give you an idea of what a great evidence-based group this is, the Endocrine Society was one of the first to latch on to the transgender ideology for minor children. And so there's no evidence sorting in that group at all. So the Endocrine Society latched onto it, and the reference ranges were changed, and doctors were told there's a population-wide deficiency of vitamin D, you need to start testing. Well, if you inflate the reference ranges, everybody's deficient. And the amount of vitamin D that people have been taking is quite toxic. And there's some case reports of people showing up in emergency rooms who have vitamin D toxicity. But the biggest issue with vitamin D is that when people have lower levels, it's reverse causation. In other words, when you get sick, your vitamin D levels go down. That's why you see so many different conditions associated with lower vitamin D levels. And as soon as you recover, the vitamin D levels come back up. And there are a lot of case reports in the medical literature. So again, if you don't read, you're going to believe the stupid story. But if you actually do some research on it, you'll find case reports where people taking supplements end up with lower vitamin D levels when they get a cold. And without changing the doses or anything else, the vitamin D levels come back up when the cold goes away. And probably the best example that was ever done was an emergency room here in the States did a study with people who were they were seizuring out from hyperglycemia. They all had their vitamin D levels when they arrived at the emergency room were 12.3, and as soon as their glucose levels were stabilized, they went up to about 28 average. So it's reverse causation. You can and this naturally this depression and then rebounding of vitamin D happens all the time when people get sick and then recover. So anyway, you'd have to read to know that. And in the studies where people were saying that people recovered from COVID from taking vitamin D, their vitamin D levels went up and then they recovered. Actually, they recovered and then their vitamin D levels went up, and it supposedly documented the benefits of supplements. But if you understand the reverse causation effect and the hundreds and hundreds of studies that have shown it, then you would just laugh at that study and say these are uninformed doctors that don't know that without supplementation, people would have recovered from COVID anyway.
This is an interesting one. As I said, I've taken vitamin D. Interestingly, though, this is not outlandish to me because it's the same thing that happens with cholesterol. When people have an incident, heart attack, they take into the hospital, their cholesterol level drops during that event. And then you have the carnivores that say, you see people with low cholesterol get heart attacks. But that's actually a normal reaction, physiological reaction of having an event, and then it will go up again. So it's I will have to read the study you mentioning because I'm ignorant at it, but it's not outlandish to me because like the body has this trend of lowering certain nutrients / hormones when an event happens. So that's very interesting. So what is the best way then to make sure that we all have adequate natural vitamin D levels, hormone D levels?
Well, you have to get out in the sun, and your body stores it for the winter. I mean, did you ever stop to think how did humans survive before we had vitamin D factories, right? And we were giving it to everybody. So you store it for the winter. And by the way, when you go outside in the sun, and I'm not talking about burning or anything like that. Everybody has different skin tone, and you have to be careful at the beginning of the season. You can't really tell because of the lighting here, but I'm pretty tan right now because it's August and I've been out in the sun quite a bit. I start with 20, 30 minutes and get up to the place where I can spend an hour and a half or two outside in the sun. Well, when you do that, your body produces 10 different types of vitamin D and thousands of photoproducts. For example, nitric oxide, which keeps your blood vessels open and allows for better blood flow. That's just one example. So there's no substitute. You can't take a vitamin D3 pill and expect to substitute for nature's plan for you to have vitamin D. So you get it in the summertime. If you live someplace where you can get out in the sun year round, that's great. If not, you tan when you can, and then that carries you over till the spring next year.
That's awesome. And what are your thoughts on tanning beds? Because a lot of tanning beds now are promoted as vitamin D beds.
Yeah, they're dangerous. And by the way, when I say dangerous, I mean habitual use. So let's say that it's January and I'm going to go to Florida and I just want to get a little bit of a start on a tan so I can spend more time outside on the beach. A couple sessions in the tanning bed is not a problem, but I know people who tan in those beds regularly. And there's certain states in Australia that have banned them because they were being used instead of, the Australian government scared everybody about going out in the sun for a while. And now they're reversing course on that. And then they eventually there's some states that have banned the use of tanning beds. So I don't think we need to ban them, but we need to tell people it's like a lot of things. You have to be careful about how you use it. I don't think we should ban alcohol, but we should be real clear that it's a treat. It's to have on your birthday and New Year's Eve. It's not to have for dinner every night.
And on the same token, what are your thoughts on sunscreens? Because obviously sunscreens will stop the absorption, right, of sun rays.
Well, people don't use it properly. That's the first thing. And there are a lot of chemicals in it that make it a little bit dangerous in terms of long-term use. So again, if in the beginning of the season somebody invited me, I have a home up on Lake Erie, and if somebody asked me to go out on the boat, for a couple of hours early in the season, I probably would use sunscreen, or I'd wear longer sleeves or something, because I wouldn't have been enough in the sun to spend 2 hours on a boat, particularly on the water. It reflects the sun and you get even more tan. So it should be used in very exceptional circumstances. But I watch people, because we have a beach, like it's a 2-minute walk to the beach from where my place is up there. So people get ready to go down to the beach, and I can look out the window when I'm working, and so they rub a little bit on, and it takes 20 minutes before it works, and you're going to end up using one of those tubes pretty much on a body my size, right? And then an hour and a half, 2 hours later, you got to do that again. And they don't do that. So people who are using it aren't using it correctly.
Yeah, I actually I've seen people that they put it before going to the beach, but they put so much on that they look almost like foil paper because they are reflecting the sun.
Oh yeah, and it's greasy and it's messy and all that. So again, and by the way, one of the things about and a lot of people get burned in spite of using it. So one of the things about not using sunscreen, except in very rare circumstances, is it forces you to have some respect for the sun. So in the beginning of the year, I mean, I love the sun. I love heat. I survive winter because I know spring is coming. It's not my favorite time, But when I go out for the first time, I'll 15 minutes on each side laying out, and I have a great place in my side yard where the sun's direct, And then if I'm going to spend more time outside, I'm going to go around to the deck where I've got a huge umbrella that covers like a whole seating area. And I'll spend more time outside, but because we're done tanning for today, right? It will be a long time before I can read a book for an hour in the sun. You know what I'm saying? So it teaches you to be much more respectful. You go inside, you wear a hat, you put something long sleeved on if it's not too hot, and you don't let yourself bake.
Yeah. Well, the reason I was harping so much on vitamin D and all the aspects of, whether we're putting sunscreen, whether we are in the sun, is because obviously there's a big correlation between vitamin D and the immune system. And I am just wondering, and this is a theory, but I wonder if vitamin D would be better performing in our body if our microbiome it's actually also in a healthy state, rather than just isolated for immunity. And that's because obviously we know that the microbiome is so important in our immune system, and so is vitamin D. And I was just wondering if you have connected these two as well.
Vitamin D in supplement form isn't influencing anything except your plasma levels. All right. So these are separate issues. All right. So this kind of goes to, well, let's figure out some way that we can get people to take vitamin D. Maybe if their microbiomes are in better shape, there's no circumstances under which this is warranted other than making supplement sellers rich. All right. So the microbiome is a separate issue, and you're correct. That's the home of your immune system. And most people have a terrible microbiome by virtue of the foods that they eat, the drugs that they've taken, the dehydration, the illnesses they've had, that sort of thing. So a good probiotic is a good thing to take for a while. Plus, changing your eating habits will shift over the microbiome as well.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Okay, let's go to diet, because I think that's the backbone of your practice, of your life, as we mentioned at the beginning. And I think you and I, this is obviously food is medicine. I mean, it goes without even saying.
But I'll give you a statistic that you should know about.
Yes.
The average adult will eat about 1 ton of food per year. Now, think about what a ton of something looks like. And then you're going to eat that in a year. And so when people say, is it all that important? How could it not be? Right? Just by sheer volume, let alone, the nutrient value and all that sort of thing. But just the sheer volume of it, it's hard to imagine that you could pass that volume of something through your body and the quality of it wouldn't matter. Right?
Absolutely. And, at the beginning, you said people were saying that they didn't eat enough calories, right? When they were doing these check yourself kind of studies. But actually, people are just not eating enough nutrients. calories, they get plenty of nutrients, everybody's deficient. So yeah, it is a lot of food, and we also eat like 3 times a day at a very minimum. So it is definitely something that is very important. So talk to me about what is the best human diet?
Well, I think the best human diet, let's start with some general principles. The first thing is we know a lot about the science of change. All right. And to get somebody to do something, the two things have to be in place. All right. They have to believe it will benefit them, and they have to be able to see themselves doing it. And so this gets missed a lot because in our field, we tend to have a lot of people who seem to want to come up with as many rules as possible, make it as unattractive and difficult as it possibly can be, and see if we can still get people to sign up for it. But again, there are people who've devoted their entire lives to figuring out what goes on in people's heads when they change something and keep changing, right? So we have to present something that is scientifically correct and that people think they can do. All right, and it has to be sustainable for a long period of time, because even if you do the right thing, if you do it for 3 weeks and quit, and then do it for 6 months and quit, and all this sort of thing, it doesn't work out. So we have always put forth what we think is a really reasonable plan. It's based on the way the healthiest people on the planet live and eat. And the first thing I'll say is I'm a vegan. I like being vegan. I made that change for personal reasons, not for health reasons. I wanted to do it. But the name of my company is not I want to be like Pam. All right. So what I do for exercise and what I eat for that's irrelevant. Let's stick with science. So we've never taught a vegan diet. And if you take a look at our pyramid, and I get beat up for this, but I'm going to stand by what I said. People have to believe that they can do it, and it has to be sustainable over a long period of time. So one of the first things we teach people is that, with a couple of exceptions, instead of asking, can I have, ask, where does this fit in? All right, so let's talk about what a food pyramid looks like. And I think the pyramid design is terrific because you eat more of stuff at the bottom, less at the top. So the foundation, as you mentioned, is starchy foods. They're calorie dense. So if you're not going to eat as much animal food and densely caloric processed food, you're going to have to replace those calories somehow. And people try to live on fruits and vegetables, and they don't last very long because they can't eat enough calories. So rice and potatoes and grains and beans, and those are your starchy foods, and they're comfort foods. People like those foods. It's not hard to get them to eat rice and potatoes, right, as the foundation. Then you have vegetables and fruit. You can have as much of that as you want. People say fruit, oh, it's bad for you. I've never seen anybody with too much fruit disease. It's ridiculous, right? It's just ridiculous. All right, so then minimally processed foods. So people eat a little bit of bread or pasta, some soy yogurt or tofu. But the key is, if you're eating more of that than you are starchy foods, fruits, and vegetables, then you know your pyramid isn't going in the right direction. So it's very easy with this design to have people understand what to do and how to stick with it and monitor themselves. And then above that is minimally processed higher fat foods like peanut butter or avocado or things of that nature, because these are high in calories. A cup of avocado has 21 grams of fat. A tablespoon of oil has 14 grams of fat. So if I have avocado toast for breakfast and an oil-based salad dressing on a big salad for lunch, I've had 70 grams of fat by 1 o'clock. So a lot of people try plant-based eating, they get fatter because they don't understand calorie density. So nuts and peanut butter and avocado, those things are condiments. So I don't avoid nuts, but I don't put my hand in the bag and eat cashews or walnuts by the handful, right? And then above that is animal food, 2 to 3 servings a week, which mimics an Asian or Indian eating style where it's used as flavoring, or Northern African style. Organic or wild caught, and we tell people you'd be best advised to not eat dairy products. They're not really fit for humans. And then at the top is treats. That's a glass of wine and chocolate and cookies. And on Christmas, that's great. But today's not Christmas. It's just Tuesday. And so we're not celebrating anything, so we don't get any desserts and that sort of thing. So that's a livable plan. People can, there's a lot of detail and science behind it, which we show people, but people can live with that. And it's much better than the You have to have raw vegetables for breakfast, and if you eat a cookie or something with white flour in it, you're going to die. But back before the world came to an end, I used to travel, and it's amazing the judgment that people have and how counterproductive it is. I remember walking into a conference one time with a cup of Starbucks coffee, and somebody said, I was going to register, and said, "You drink coffee?" I said, "I'm clearly trying to kill myself. You caught me." I mean, how do you answer something like that? I remember one time starving to death. I'd hosted a fundraiser, and we were in this restaurant, and the waiter brought over some white bread rolls, and I had one of them. Somebody said, "I can't believe you eat something with white flour." I said, "Again, a death wish. You caught me. I'm definitely trying to kill myself." But this type of nonsense doesn't help our cause, right? You want people to do the right thing most of the time. You want to give them a plan that works and is livable, and that doesn't make their friends and family think that they got kidnapped, locked in the basement, and brainwashed and dropped off in front of the restaurant for mom's birthday party. So you take a look at what's fashionable today. I can only eat between 8 o'clock and 4 o'clock. I have to eat within a window, and I can't have anything with white flour, and I can't have dessert, and I can't have this. I can't eat in any restaurants. They don't make the food anyway. I mean, and people go, "Nobody will support me." Well, I wonder why. It's because you're a lunatic, right? Stop that behavior. Get in tune with the rest of the world who enjoy eating and celebration and that sort of thing. And so people seem to think that it's either you're eating Pizza Hut and McDonald's for your meals, or else you're on some type of austere, ridiculous version of this, which nobody wants to do. The other thing we hear all the time is, "My family won't do it with me." Well, I wonder why. It's because they think you're nuts, right? That birthday cake is going to kill you on somebody's birthday. It's ridiculous. So anyway, all this to say, it's plant-based, it's low-fat plant-based that allows for most of what, I think with the exception of dairy and oil, pretty much there's some place for everything in that pyramid, and it's easy to do. I've been able to do it for 28 years, and one of the things, or 35 or 32 years now, and one of the things that people say is, "You're really kind of like a normal person." Well, that's what you want people to say, right? I have a neighbor up at the lake who's overweight, and we were all sitting on the patio one day and eating my food, and she goes, I could do this. I could do, right? That's what you want people to say. Like, they go out to eat with you and they say, "God, Pam had pasta and she didn't drop dead," number one. So it's good to know. And she didn't try to get me not to have any. She just ordered it without the meatballs, and that seems like I could be like that, right? That's what you want to do.
Yeah, we definitely want to inspire. And I think this is the other thing, like online, everything is so polarized, right? You have to do it this way or that way. There's no space for any flexibility, and you're going to have to eat leaves for the rest of your life. But there's such an abundance of food out there. And as you said, you can make dishes that are like pasta based, and they have potatoes, and like you can just enjoy food that is flavorful.
Right.
Just because you don't know how to cook something doesn't mean it doesn't exist.
Right.
It's incredible. And you said, you were saying all the examples, but I can't do this, I can't have that. And it's like, that can't, like, that's already a limiting belief. It's not like you don't even want to. Like, if you are committing to something, you're committing for yourself, you know why you're doing it. There's no can't in there. It's just like, I actually don't want to, because, well, there are other things I can thrive on. This is like a brilliant way to do it. So the shifting of mindset is so important.
Well, and I've watched this happen. I have a nonprofit that's been very involved in litigation in this COVID space, and it meets the local chapter meets in my office because I have a large meeting room, and we own a food service operation, and our food is so amazing. I mean, I have a blessed life mainly because my kitchen prepares a lot of stuff I would never make for myself, like cheesy spaghetti squash with marinara sauce and pecan meatballs using alternate cheese and all that. But when people started coming to our place, I would say 99% of them had never been in the place before, and they were not eating well. But it's astounding how many of them would look at our deli case and go, "That looks really good. I think I'll try it." And the next thing you know, the meeting is on Thursday night, and we have to cook extra food on Wednesday because all the people who are members that come regularly expect to be able to get dinner when they come. and eat it there, So I think that the key is what you can eat and how beautiful it can look and appetizing and the whole nine yards. And a lot of times people would say, I'm shocked because I came over to your house for dinner. Or I ate at your place and at your business. And I assumed you weren't going to serve something awful, but I didn't really know it was going to be so good, And that's what you want, is for people to fall in love with the food and think, I can do this. Back to what I said in the beginning, people have to think this will benefit me, and I can see myself doing it. And then those two things, along with the right instruction, now we've got a chance at making this stick.
Yeah, this is why I love doing retreats, because I feel like I had so many people come like, oh my God, what are we gonna eat? And then you have this beautiful display of Ottolenghi style salads, but they are plant-based, fully plant-based without the animal products. And like the plant cheeses, and I use no oil in my cooking, but I do use fats in the sense that I would make cheeses with like cashews but of course you're not expected to eat the whole thing.
Right.
So it's different than just going into the bag, which I used to do. But yeah, it's like they see this, is like, wow, this is amazing. And they managed to even kick off addictions they had before coming on the retreats and thinking they would never be able not to have sugar. But like, actually we are, offering them this amazing food that has no added sugar, only natural fruit. And by the way, on the fruit point, I reverse type 2 diabetes eating mostly fruit.
Right.
So I'm like,
yeah, it's not poison. It's
not poison. So yeah, doing the retreats and just exposing people to the experience. This is why what you're doing is working, because people are like able to have that experience. It's not just a thought or an afterthought or even an assumption. It's like, actually I've experienced it and it's brilliant, right?
A couple of funny stories I'll share with you. One is I used to love doing the McDougall advanced study weekends. I was a speaker at a couple of them. And one of the things, there would be a lot of new people who had never been through the McDougall program before. And one of the things that John and Mary would say at the beginning is, Mary always was the person in charge of the food and worked with the kitchen at the hotel. And they'd say, you can eat as much as you want. And trust me, you will not gain weight. You'll lose weight while you're here. So I dare you to eat yourself into weight gain. And by Sunday, people would be saying, I've never eaten this much food in my life, and my pants are loose and the whole nine yards. And that's an advantage too, because people hate portion control. They don't like it. But one of the funniest things that ever happened was, I remember being a speaker at a conference in another city. And this particular hotel had never hosted a plant-based conference. So they did a very good job on making the recipes according to the promoter's instructions. But what they didn't understand is how plant eaters eat. All right. So the first night that we're there, they said, what we're going to do, because we want the speakers to be able to talk to people during the dinner hour. So we're going to have them eat first, and then we'll bring everybody else in, and you guys can just talk to people, which I thought that was a great idea, right? So there must have been 11 of us, and we go up to the buffet and we get, the typical way that I eat a lot of food. People go, for a little person, my God, do you eat a lot of food? So we all eat the way we all eat. And I'm sitting at a table where the promoters of the conference are, and somebody comes out from the kitchen and says, sir, we have a problem. And he says, what's that? He goes, well, your speakers have just eaten the buffet. And the guy says, well, bring some more out. And he goes, no, I don't think you understand. They've eaten the buffet. He said, we had no idea the way people, they thought everybody's going to come get a tablespoon of this. And so one of the speakers sitting at the table said, well, that's unfortunate news. I was going to go back for seconds. So to their credit, they hurried up and fixed it. Good food service people know how to do that. But the point is, doesn't that sound like more fun than sitting down with a dinner plate? You got 2 tablespoons of this and a tablespoon of that, and you're hungry after you eat it. This way you can eat what you want. And that's so much more fun. And I think that was a big change for me, because I was always trying to starve myself thin, and I starved myself fatter, mainly because after 3 days of restriction, you go, I can't stand this. So you go out and eat a whole pizza, and you're back in the same routine that you were in before. So that's another added attraction, is how much food you can eat. And actually, that's one of our biggest problems, is particularly for overweight people, them giving themselves permission to eat a big plate of food. They're not used to
So
that.
true. So true. I mean, I hosted a yoga brunch last month. I do it monthly in Porto. I live in Portugal. And I had a couple, I actually had a gentleman that joined for the yoga, and then his wife joined us for the brunch. And he is from California. He's in his 60s, and he actually did the McDougall program a while back. He's quite a big guy. And I inspired him to go back on a mostly plant-based diet, which I was really happy about. But the first time he met me, there is a buffet in this place where we do the yoga brunch. And I went back 3 times and came back with these massive plates. And he was just like, where are you putting it?
Yeah. Yeah. And by the way, I'm going to eat again in 3 hours, right? Around 3 o'clock, I get hungry again, and it's time for another something or other, bowl of soup or whatever. Yeah, it's a wonderful, wonderful way to live. It doesn't involve deprivation. And I think another thing that's really important too is that a lot of folks in our crowd make it difficult by saying you have to eat certain foods, certain particular plant foods. And I'll never forget, I learned this early in my career. I was doing a follow-up call with one of my initial clients. I said, "Well, how's it going?" She goes, "It's all right." I said, "Well, you don't sound very happy about it." She goes, "Well, I'm eating kale. I'm eating green apples." I said, "Well, doesn't sound like you like those foods." She goes, "I don't." I said, "Well, then why are you eating them?" She says, "Well, they got those charts at the health food store that show the most densely nutritious leafy greens and which apple's better." I said, "Well, what kind of leafy greens do you like?" She said, "Romaine lettuce." I said, "Eat that." All right. "What kind of apples do you like?" "I like yellow apples." "Eat those." So there's no special food that you have to like. And even very picky eaters with a limited palate, people say all the time, and this comes up when I'm training health professionals, they'll say, "Well, what do you do with the person who is really not willing to try a lot of new things?" And I said, "Well, you'd be surprised how much you have to work with." Because I remember this prostate cancer patient saying one time, "Everything you're telling me makes sense, but the problem is I don't like plant food." I said, "Okay, well, let's see if we can look at that for a minute." I said, "Do you like potatoes?" "Oh, I love potatoes." "Like baked potatoes?" "Sure." "How about green beans?" "Yeah." "Peas?" "Yeah." "Carrots?" "Yeah." "Corn?" "Yeah." "How about bananas and apples?" "Well, we go through rice." "Yeah." "Well, we end up with a list of like 35 foods." I said, "How about if we made a meal plan out of these foods?" He goes, "You could do that?" I said, "Absolutely. In fact, I have one all prepared for you. You're not the first person who's come in with a supposedly limited palate." And what happens is that over time, people become more adventurous. And so this same guy, he and his wife started taking yoga classes, and the yoga studio is right across the hall from my office in our building. So he comes in one day, he goes, "You're not going to believe what I did today." And I said, "What's that?" He says, "My wife makes green smoothies in the morning, and I had one." And I said, "And yet you're still alive." I said, he goes, "No, you don't understand." He goes, "I actually liked it." He goes, I would do this again." I said, "Well, great. See?" So their palates get more adventurous over time as they become more and more confident that they'll like it, that they won't be afraid to try something because they don't have to eat anything.
You mentioned something at the beginning and now. So we mentioned that the resistance of the palate, the taste, and also obviously the mindset. But there is also again, going back to the microbiome, a lot of people will give the excuse that, "Oh my God, I can't eat all these foods because, I get bloated, I can't digest it, I get gassy, and it's just not pretty." So and that is true, but there is a reason why. And how do we fix this problem so that they don't use it as an excuse?
Well, I think the first thing is that you bring up a very good point, and that is that your microbiome its current composition is based on a lot of things, including the drugs you've taken, but largely your diet. And so what most people have been doing is preferentially feeding the bad guys, right? And so when you start starving them out, they're fairly angry fellows, and then you get a lot of gas and discomfort. But it takes about 2 or 3 weeks for that to shift out, and then things start to get better. So it's usually a very transitory thing. It resolves itself in a little bit of time. So you just have to tell people to be patient. And then the other thing too is many of them start out extremely constipated. So their bowels haven't worked properly for a long time. Between being dehydrated and not eating enough fiber, their gastrointestinal tract is really in bad shape, and that corrects itself fairly quickly. But they have to sort of soldier through that part of it, and then it gets better from there.
I actually had a client who was only going to the bathroom every 3 days.
Oh my gosh.
And I put her on a plant-based diet, and I'm like, "Okay, let's try this. Okay, let's just swap all the animal products for just plants. Give me a month. Let's see how it goes. And she sent me a message saying, you won't believe it, I'm going every morning. I'm like, that's exactly how it
They're
should
usually
be.
happy about it too, you
Yes,
know?
yes,
Yeah.
because she's like, I feel weird when I don't go, but I just don't. I'm like, no, you will go. And it's amazing. And they feel better. And now, actually, lately she told me she goes even more than once a day. Now she upped
Mm-hmm.
her intake of plants and fiber. So it took a while to get used to it, but she feels amazing. And another thing that happened is that this is really affecting her hormones properly. So, for example, she used to profusely sweat, I mean, over sweat. Now she does less and it doesn't smell bad like it used to
Mm-hmm.
be. So even the microbiome, the skin is adapting to the new diet. There's not much
Right.
toxicity in the body. The acidity levels are obviously balancing out. So your skin pH is not as acidic as before. And people don't think about all these details, but like they're so important if you're looking at overall health, right?
Mm-hmm. Right, right. Well, I think something that happens, when people start looking at health differently, like health is not achieved by hanging out with physicians. The doctor's office is someplace you want to go when something's wrong, right? Collectively, we've trained everybody to think that hanging out with doctors is the key to health. And the medical profession here in the States in particular has convinced people that their bodies are fragile and subject to breaking down all the time. So you better have endless testing done and diagnostic and screening tests done so that we can catch everything early. And so people have this fragile idea of their health. And so when you start using diet and teaching people how to be in charge of their own health, and they find out how strong and resilient their bodies are, it's astounding. I was listening to a podcast last night. You know who Colin Campbell is? He's 90. He's writing a book that's coming out next year. He has a publisher. I mean, he's still living life, right? But he was talking about that he and his wife got COVID in their late 80s. And he goes, "Well, we were sick for a couple of days. We got better." Okay, so I know people who were 40 years old, they get the flu and they're in bed for a week, right? Here was a person 86 years old gets COVID and says, yeah, I laid on the couch for a couple of days and got back to work. So you start to have confidence in your body and to withdraw from, we call it the medical mill. You start withdrawing yourself from the medical mill and interacting with doctors in a much more healthy way. And you don't need as much medical attention, and you don't agree to as much medical attention and that sort of thing. And you begin to take care of yourself. And I think one of the most dangerous things that's happened in westernized societies is the outsourcing of your health to other people. We need government experts to tell us what to eat and to tell us what screening tests get. We need medical centers, and everybody's telling us what to do about our health except ourselves. And so I'm 67. And so when I grew up, my grandparents were immigrants, and we had a big garden. I'll tell you a little bit about my upbringing because it's so different than it is now. And it's sad what it is now. But we only visited our family doctor when we were sick. So if my mother had called our family doctor, first of all, so I'm going to bring the girls over this afternoon, he would have said, why? Is there something wrong? No, I just think you ought to look at them. He would have thought she was needing looked at. Like, what's the matter with you? Bring healthy children over here on a Thursday afternoon, right? So my grandparents had a garden, and by the way, we were outside all the time, running around and playing. I remember sometimes if we ran in and out of the house too much in the summertime, my mother locked the door. Stay outside. I'll tell you when lunch is ready. But we were at large in the neighborhood. We go over to my grandparents who are European, and my grandfather had a big garden. And I think about this sometimes, the reaction today. We'd pull a carrot out of the ground, wipe it on our shorts, and eat it. And I remember my grandmother coming running out of the house to do an intervention. The kids are going to die because they may have swallowed some dirt. We picked apples, but he had a fruit orchard too, and we'd pick apples off the tree and eat them. But it was such a healthier way to grow up. And we ate this type of a diet. We had animal food, but nobody had enough money to eat this all the time. And I remember this is when we were still living in a little house. It's before my dad's business got successful, but they built a McDonald's in a shopping center at the right near our neighborhood. And I remember this. Nobody even had enough money to eat McDonald's all the time, but we'd go get a McDonald's meal, and the hamburger would be like this big, and the French fries would be a third, right? So even if you ate it every day, you couldn't get fat. There just wasn't enough of it. but there also wasn't enough money to live on it either. So really what we have to do is go back to that time when doctors are for sick people, healthcare systems are for sick people. The food that is the most accessible to you is the best to eat. And get outside and play and run and sweat and live life, you know. That's what we should be doing, as opposed to what I see people doing. Those are the people my age couldn't run a mile if their life depended on it. I run 9-minute miles for an hour and come in and go to work, right? And I'm not saying that to brag. I'm saying that I think most people would rather be like that at my age than the way that they are.
Totally. First of all, big shout out to the Campbells. I'm friends with them because I interviewed them so many times, and I love Dr. T. Colin Campbell. But you're right. We talked, actually, when we talked, it was just after the pandemic, and it was very I had gotten it. I got sick, and it took me a little bit of time. It took me 3 weeks to get better, in the sense like the fatigue, but the symptoms of flu went away after 5 days. All I did is I fasted because my body didn't really want to have food, but I took a lot of homemade antibiotics, like lots of oil of oregano and garlic. I stank, but it was so helpful. And I was like, that's it. And I was telling them how I watched the documentary from his son Nelson, and I was like, just in bed watching documentaries about health, and I relaxed for once. Actually, it wasn't really sad that I got sick. But all my peers that got the injections, they always sick all the time. And after the injections and before you name it, they were always sick. Like I had clients that were sick literally every month. And I'm like, don't you see that this is not right? So, and I haven't gotten sick since. And I have so many people around me that keep on saying, oh, I'm positive. I'm like, okay. And so there is definitely something to be said about how we are approaching our health. Like, look after your body. That's, again, going back to the title, is like our biggest weapon. Also, you have a very good point here. Well, your age, I would never tell, but also you're a testament that we don't decay as we age. We mature, we change, of course, is life, but you are living life instead of surviving, as in my body is still walking around and I'm breathing, but like I'm not really living, which is the state of mind and state of being that a lot of people are. And I hate when people say, oh my gosh, I'm getting old, I'm 50.
Well, I love watching or listening to or reading stories about centenarians. And a couple I'll share with you that I think are great is this guy in Atlanta bought a barbershop when he was 94. And he said that some of his friends thought he was crazy. He said, I always wanted to have my own barbershop, and now I have the money to do it. So he cuts hair a couple days a week, and then he has other people that work in the shop too. He's 94. Okay. Another one was a story that I read online about a guy who, for his 106th birthday, wearing a bathing suit, dove off of his son's boat into the lake where they docked their boat. And he reported that on his 102nd birthday, he took up horseback riding. And I think that's the way I want to be. However much time I'm here on this planet, I want to live it. I don't want to sit and watch it all go by. There's a 106-year-old doctor here in Ohio who still sees patients a couple days a week. So I think that the human body was designed to last a lot longer than our current mortality data show. And if you take care of yourself and you have a reason for living, and I think that's a lot of what's missing for people too, is they're miserable. And that will shorten your life probably as much as anything else. But if you love your life and you take care of yourself and you have good reasons for living, it's possible to live a long, long time. So much to the chagrin of my detractors, I'm going to be here for a few more decades and keep doing what I'm doing. And we're expanding our business, not contracting. People ask me, when are you going to retire? And do what? How many books can you read? How many lunches can you have with friends? And then what, right?
Yeah,
there's still so much to be done in this field. So.
Oh my goodness, for sure. Like I never feel like I'm working. I feel like, well, I'm actually loving what I do. So it's not job. Why would I retire from this? It's crazy. but
Right.
also, helping people is just such a privilege, I feel like, especially when we have been shown the holy grail of longevity and really true life. And of course, there are things that are our control. I mean, we're bombarded by toxicity, EMF, I mean, you name it, like even the very, being on Zoom using wireless, of course. But this is why it's even more important to look after our bodies even better. And of course, we talked about nutrition as the main pillar, but lifestyle is equally as important. And you are a yoga teacher too.
Yes, absolutely. I love yoga. I tell people I'm not in the asylum because of yoga. Whatever's going on, you shut it out for 90 minutes and come out a new person. So, yeah, one of my favorite things to do.
Yeah. And so if people are like, well, why is movement so important? What would you tell them?
Well, because human bodies are meant to move. I mean, and historically we had to. And so the longer you sit, first of all, it's you cannot stay lean if you're sitting. Sooner or later that will catch up with you. But the other thing is that in the absence of movement, people get stiff and sore and they lose range of motion and they gradually become disabled. My own mother did it. I watched her. She never exercised, and I watched her gradually disintegrate, and her life ended early as a result of it. So there aren't any of these centenarians that I'm talking about, these people who do marvelous things in their older years. They're all fit and mobile. Some of them are still driving a car at the age of 80. I mean, they may not be driving to California from Ohio, but they're still able to drive a car and get up and down stairs and that sort of thing. So your ticket to independence is being physically fit. Having the ability to bend over, tie your shoes, pick up a box, carry it across the kitchen, unload the dishwasher, go down to the basement and bring something up. That's the key to living independently. So
very true. I mean, I know we only have an hour and it's up, and I could ask you a million questions.
Well, we'll do it again sometime.
We'll have to do it again. But in the meantime, if people want to work with you, find out about you, read your work, your books, how do we get in touch with you?
My email address is pampopper@msn.com. My company's website address is wellnessforumhealth.com. By the way, I put out a newsletter on Monday, videos on Tuesday and Thursday, and a healthcare newsletter on Wednesday. It's all free, so you can subscribe for free. So feel free to email me. We'll add you to the list.
Nice. And do you do courses online? Well?
We do courses online and live through Zoom. We have 3,600 hours of video programming. We probably teach again that much live every year. And we own a school. We train health professionals. So we teach people how to do the work that we're doing through our school.
Amazing. Okay, we need to chat. Thank you so much about
Thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
No, mine. And I can't wait to have you back soon. Bye.
All right. I'll look forward to it.
Thank you so much, Dr. Popper, and thank you everyone for staying on the show. I hope you enjoyed it. There was so much goodness to learn from here. I didn't know about vitamin D in those terms, and it makes sense. But I will be looking at that beautiful study and share it with you so you can read it as well. And I really enjoyed the conversation. It's very thoughtful and very broad and holistic, as it should be. So guys, as always, if you enjoyed this episode, please not only go and check out the show notes for all the information on Dr. Popper, follow her and support her, but also support The Green Life. Go on to the platforms you're listening on, give us reviews, cheer us on, help us grow so that I can have amazing speakers come on that actually want to be here as we grow. Thank you. Bye.